217 trees died in 6 weeks, and the first thing I grabbed was a mason jar. Because sometimes you need something small and ridiculous to hold up and say, look, and I was standing in what used to be my paradise, 2 acres outside Phoenix. I spent 3 years building with my own 2 hands, Japanese maples, a little hobby vineyard, I planted for fun, a koi pond. I moved fish into myself now, a toxic wasteland that smelled like rotten eggs. I held that jar up and the water inside was yellow viscous, like someone had strained bad light through it, and the fish died in 18 hours, just like that. Yeah, that happened. My name is Garrett Flynn. I'm 52. I spent 25 years as a petroleum geologist. I've drilled wells on 4 continents. I know subsurface geology the way a surgeon knows anatomy. I can tell you what's 300 feet down before the first drill bit touches dirt. So when my homeowners association decided we needed our own well, I paid attention. I should have anyway. Lenore and I sold my consulting practice, moved out here to Maplewood Estates, bought a 2-acre corner lot big enough for breathing room, small enough to manage ourselves, and I spent 3 years turning desert dirt into something I'd be proud to walk into every morning. Mesquite and Palo Verde trees, 12 grapevines for hobby, winemaking, a cedar workshop out back where I build chairs just because I like to give them away. Most mornings were coffee hummingbirds, wind chimes, quiet, ordinary, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your life ticking along. Then Darlene moved in. Darlene Kapiki, late 50s haircut that never moved tennis visor indoors, a big white SUV with a vanity plate that read something dumb about the HOA she made. Being petty looked like a full-time job. She weaponized meeting rules, sent violation notices for trash cans, left out 10 minutes too long, made an elderly vet repaint his house because his beige wasn't beige, trademark approved, you get the picture. Her board nodded at everything she wanted. New residents wanted to be liked. They didn't want to rock the boat. 6 months before everything fell apart, she sent me a violation for my grapevines. No agriculture, she said, citing a covenant section. I showed up at the meeting with the original covenant's viticulture explicitly allowed for personal use. 40 residents watched her face go tight when she lost that battle. She told me in that syrupy way she had, "We'll be watching your property closely, Mr. Flynn," click like a warning. Arizona was 3 years into a brutal drought. Water rules were tight, pressure was spotty, and Darlene got obsessed with community water independence. She promoted the idea at meetings, brought in a drilling consultant, talked about property values, how a well would be an asset. I stood up and said what someone with my background has to say: you need a proper geological survey. You drill wrong, you can hit mineral veins, contaminated layers, ancient seawater. There are things you can set loose underground. She waved me off like a mosquito, called me a hobbyist for my little vineyard, and the room laughed and moved on. I assumed the county permitting process would stop any nonsense. Then one morning in early May, the diesel drill rig was grinding away on the HOA common land, a narrow strip a hair's breadth from my fence. No notice, no permits, just men in hard hats and the noise of a drill. The foreman wouldn't show me permits. I called the county zero. No well permit on file for Maplewood. I called Darlene voicemail. By sunset, they had punched down 380 feet. 3 days after they stopped drilling, my koi pond smelled like a sewer. I built that pond 15 years earlier, moved every fish like they were family. They were floating belly up. The water had a greasy yellow film. The smell, hydrogen sulfide, hit me like a fist. My Japanese maples, browned from the roots up Lenora's vegetable garden, looked torched. I dug out my old field testing kit, hadn't used it in years, and ran a sulfur analysis, 340 parts per million. In my drilling days, anything over 50 parts per million is a red flag. Call hazmat, shut down operations. I'd seen rigs hit sulfide layers before. People evacuated, wells were sealed. The geologist who skipped the survey got fired. This well had no survey, no testing, just a hole punched into a sulfide-bearing vein, and pressurized groundwater started leaching sulfuric compounds into the shallow aquifer, our aquifer. I emailed the HOA board photos, test results, emergency well contamination. Darlene replied in 6 hours. CC'd everyone, calling my homemade tests uncertified, assuring residents the contractor said the well was safe. Minor landscaping adjustments, she wrote. My trees were dying, and she called it an adjustment. I wasn't invited to the emergency meeting where the board voted 4-0 to use the well for common area irrigation. They were going to pump contaminated water onto shared landscaping to make it official. Her property sat uphill from the well. Mine was downhill like a dozen others. Within 2 weeks, neighbors called with dead lawns. A 74-year-old neighbor lost her 40-year-old orange tree. Another family's kids were coughing, asking why the backyard smelled like a terrible bathroom. Yellow stains appeared on white fences where sprinkler mist dried. The heat made the smell thick enough to make people close windows in 90-degree weather. I documented everything: time-stamped photos, GPS locations, water samples every 48 hours, but I needed certified proof. I hired a state-certified environmental lab, $1,200 out of pocket. The lab called before the written report industrial waste level numbers. Hydrogen sulfide between 280 and 410 parts per million pH, 4.2 battery acid territory. You should lawyer up, the tech told me. I filed a complaint with the state water regulators. Their inspector timeline 6 to 8 weeks. That's what the email said. 6 to 8 weeks while our neighborhood became a toxic dump. Darlene sent another mass email calling our tests hysteria and accusing certain residents of fear-mongering. Then the certified letter came for me. My koi pond was an unapproved water feature contaminating community groundwater. Remove it in 30 days or face $200 per day fines. She was blaming me for a hole she had punched in the ground. I started quietly building allies. Rex Albright, retired Army Corps engineer, showed up with surveying gear from his garage. He offered to map the contamination plume. Over evenings, Rex and I ran probes every 50 feet, measured conductivity. Higher numbers meant more dissolved minerals contamination. The plume was spreading 200 feet per week. Predictable, relentless. We formed a coalition, the Maplewood Restoration Group, 14 households committed to fight. Meanwhile, I pulled public records. The drilling company, nephew's company. Win-win if you don't read the fine print. I dug through HOA finances and county records with my attorney's help. We found a $7,000 payment from the driller to Darlene 2 days after the contract was signed, a kickback. And then more payments. That's when Mrs. Morgan hired an attorney and sent a demand letter for $18,000 for her orange tree. I hired Ramona Sky, an environmental lawyer who'd taken down a mining company before. She read the reports and said bluntly, "We have an airtight contamination case, but courts take months, sometimes years. Your neighborhood dies in the meantime if you rely only on slow litigation. Make it impossible for her to hide," she said. "Make it visual. Make it undeniable." So we did. I rigged a demonstration. 4 clear columns, digital monitors, fathead minnows in sealed chambers, a simple bioassay. If water kills standardized test fish within a minute or two, it's unsafe. Lenora painted labels, Rex engineered the monitors, and we pulled every procedural lever. State agencies notified, proxies collected, media contacted, not to humiliate but to force transparency. Darlene panicked when the county health inspector finally visited and verified no permit existed. She called an emergency meeting to push an indemnity clause that would shield board members from liability. She went door-knocking, whispering that maybe the contamination came from irresponsible gardeners planting doubt. She tried to postpone, lock the clubhouse, intimidate people. They even sent me a cease and desist after I did an interview with a local TV station. Threats on cream letterhead. Ramona laughed. "Truth is a defense. Keep the letter," she said. "It's evidence." We rehearsed. We brought witnesses from her previous neighborhoods. We set game cameras at the well site. We had bank records, contract filings, lab reports. On the night of the meeting, the room was packed. Cameras, reporters from the state paper, the county inspector, and investigator from the regulator's office. Mrs. Morgan told the room about her orange tree and how it tied to her husband's memory. A young mother held up medical bills for her child who'd had chemical burns. People were shaking. Then we ran the demonstration. Well water into column 1, pH 4.1 H2S, 520 parts per million, red alarm on the monitor. My pond water pH 6.8 H2S, 12 parts per million. City tap water clean. EPA safe threshold in the comparison column. We released the fish into each column. Column 1, fish thrashed, disoriented. 30 seconds in, they were fighting for their gills. 90 seconds later, dead floating belly up. The room went quiet. No spin could explain that. Then we played the game camera footage, Darlene and her nephew meeting at the well site before the board vote envelopes exchanged jokes about deal with permits later. The investigator went to his phone. I watched the color drain from her face. Within 48 hours, the well was red-tagged, legal action was opened, the driller's bond got called, the nephew fled, and was later arrested trying to cross state lines. Darlene pleaded out jail time, restitution, lifetime ban from serving on an HOA board. The drilling company folded. Remediation wasn't cheap and it wasn't clean, but it was possible. We shut down the well, sealed it, excavated the most contaminated soil, installed filtration systems, and the state and bonding companies paid into cleanup after lawsuits and insurance claims. The neighborhood hired a legitimate environmental firm. Within months, the worst of the contamination was contained, and the aquifer slowly began to purge itself. We rewrote our bylaws, independent bids for any work over a threshold, geological surveys required for subsurface work, quarterly posted audits, recall thresholds lowered, so a single power-mad president couldn't lock everything up again. The Morgans planted a new orange sapling grafted from their old tree's rootstock. We started an annual tree day. People bring shovels and tamales and plant native, drought-resistant trees. Lenore and I planted a mesquite together. The root ball hit the dirt with a satisfying thud, like hope taking hold. We established a small scholarship for students studying water resource management because if disaster teaches you anything, it's that you either wait to be saved or you learn how to never be caught by surprise again. If there's a lesson here, it's not dramatic, it's practical. Power hides behind paperwork and polite smiles. HOAs aren't inherently evil, but they're ripe for capture when people stop asking questions. You make corruption visible, you document, you test, you photograph, you get certified reports, you build a coalition, you take the small, boring procedural steps that scare control freaks more than your anger does. They fear documentation. They don't fear shouting. So here's my question for you. What would you do if the person in charge of your neighborhood community put profit ahead of your kids' safety? Drop your story below. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to fight something that smelled like power more than it did like justice. Share what worked, what failed. If you've got advice for someone in the middle of this right now, say it, because As don't fear anger, they fear paperwork, and sometimes that paperwork is all a small group of tired, determined neighbors need to save a place that matters.